What if I told you that everything you believed about medieval winters was untrue? We imagine nights gathered around roaring fireplaces and peasants huddling around warm hearths. But this image is largely a romantic fantasy. For the vast majority of the population, winter was a time of hardship, and fire was a luxury that could not be wasted. Surviving the Middle Ages without a constant flame was a harsh reality that required not heroism, but incredible ingenuity, discipline, and adaptation.
This cold bites deep today.
It was an era when cold was not just an inconvenience, but a constant, tangible enemy that penetrated walls and clothing. People were forced to use every available resource, every bit of knowledge, to survive until spring. They built their homes using the heat of the earth itself, created clothing that functioned as a personal fortress, and ate food that did not require fire to prepare.
You can! Wait for me!
Watch the video to the end to learn how medieval man could exist in a world where heat was the main currency, and why our ancestors were much more resilient than we can imagine. I'm going to reveal the best-kept secret of historical films. The huge blazing fireplace in a castle was more of a status symbol than an effective source of heat. Most of the energy went straight up the chimney, taking precious heat with it. For the huge stone halls of castles, such a fireplace was a drop in the ocean. It could barely heat the small space directly in front of it. Most of the time, such rooms were only slightly warmer than outside. Aristocrats and lords did not sit in light tunics. They wrapped themselves in furs and heavy fabrics. For the average peasant or townsman, even such an inefficient fireplace was an unaffordable luxury. Firewood was expensive, and the right to collect it in the forest was strictly regulated. The forests around growing cities were quickly cut down, turning fuel into a scarce commodity. Therefore, ordinary people could not afford to burn a fire around the clock just for heating. The hearth was used exclusively for cooking, and this was done as quickly as possible. The idea that every house had a cheerful fire burning is not true. Fire was a constant danger in densely built-up wooden cities or thatched villages. Fires were a frequent and destructive phenomenon, so people tried not to leave open flames unattended. At night, the hearth was almost always extinguished, leaving only smoldering coals to save fuel and avoid tragedy. The real source of heat in a simple house was not so much the fire itself as the heat accumulated during the day from cooking. A clay or stone oven, if there was one, cooled slowly, giving off heat for several hours. But in the poorest dwellings, there was not even that. Only an open hearth in the center of the room. All the heat from it rose and escaped through the smoke hole in the roof. Thus, for most people, winter was spent in a constant struggle against the cold, rather than in cozy warmth. They did not live by the fire. They lived despite its practical absence for heating. This forced them to look for other, more passive, and constant sources of heat conservation. Survival depended not on flames, but on insulation. We need to rethink the very concept of a medieval house. It was not so much a living space in our understanding as it was a shelter, a protective shell. Its main function was not to create a comfortable temperature, but to preserve the minimum amount of heat generated by the inhabitants themselves and their activities. The walls, roof, and floor all worked like a multi-layered cocoon. This culture of heat conservation permeated all aspects of life. People slept together to keep each other warm, wore clothes for weeks without changing, and sealed any cracks in the house. Winter was a time when life came to a standstill, shrinking to the minimum necessary for survival. Activity was reduced in order to expend fewer precious calories. The entire structure of medieval society was adapted to this reality. The winter months were not a time for wars, major construction projects, or long journeys. It was a period of hibernation, of waiting, when the main task was simply to survive the darkness and cold. People relied not on fire, but on their own endurance. Understanding this fire poverty changes our view of history. It shows that medieval man was an incredibly adaptable creature. He found ingenious solutions in conditions that seem unbearable to us. And these solutions lay in the areas of construction, clothing, and social organization. Do you agree with this? Please tell us what you think about this. Every opinion is valuable. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next investigations into how our ancestors really lived. Are you ready to learn the truth about how medieval people wore their own homes? The key to survival in a cold climate was not architecture, but clothing. The medieval wardrobe was not a matter of fashion, but a vital insulation system. People wore several layers of clothing almost around the clock, and each layer served a specific function. The main material was undoubtedly wool. Its unique properties made it indispensable in the absence of constant heating. Thanks to its structure, wool fabric creates many air pockets that retain body heat. But its most important property is that it continues to warm even when wet. The secret of wool lay in lanolin, a natural fat that coats the fibers. This fat repels water and has antibacterial properties. This meant that woolen clothing could remain relatively clean and odor-free for long periods of time. In an era when washing during the winter was nearly impossible, this was critically important. The bottom layer of clothing, which was next to the body, was usually made of linen. Linen absorbed sweat well and protected the skin from the rough woolen fabric of the outer layers. However, linen had a major drawback. When wet, it lost its insulating properties and took a long time to dry. Therefore, the purpose of the outer woolen layers was to prevent the linen shirt from getting wet. A typical costume consisted of a linen shirt, camisa, and trousers, brieri, over which a woolen tunic or kata was worn. On top of that, there could be another longer and thicker woolen cloak or surcoat. The head was always covered with a hood or cap, as a significant amount of heat escapes through it. People wore not just clothes, but entire systems. For example, their legs were wrapped in strips of woolen fabric, known as windings or windings. These not only kept their calves warm, but also protected their trousers from dirt and moisture. Woolen socks were worn on the feet, followed by leather shoes, which were often stuffed with straw or moss for extra insulation. Clothing was incredibly expensive. Making fabric was a laborious process that took up most of the women's time during the winter. Spinning yarn and weaving on a primitive loom required weeks of work. Therefore, clothes were cherished, repaired until the very end, and passed down from generation to generation. People did not have separate sets of clothes for home and for outside. They slept in the same linen shirt they wore during the day. When going to bed, they simply took off their outer, street layers and covered themselves with them. A simple straw mattress often served as a bed on which the whole family slept together for warmth. Hands were protected with mittens or gloves, which were also made of wool. Noble ladies and gentlemen could afford fur linings and trimmings. Fur was an even more effective insulator, but its cost made it affordable only to the elite. This multi-layered woolen armor was the first and main line of defense. It allowed a person to retain their own body heat, turning them into a personal heater. Without this sophisticated clothing system, survival in medieval winter conditions would have been unthinkable. In the next chapter, we will talk about how people used the earth itself to keep warm. Something you've never seen before. Houses that weren't built upwards, but downwards. We are used to images of wooden half-timbered houses, whitewashed stone buildings, towers and castles. But in the early Middle Ages, and in poor agricultural regions, there was another lesser-known world of architecture. These were dugouts and semi-dugouts, which in archaeology are called Grubenhaus, literally pit houses. These structures did not simply arise out of poverty. They were an ingenious response to the shortage of wood and fuel, as well as the need to survive in a climate where winters could be long and harsh. The main idea behind such structures was not to save money, but to understand that the earth itself can be the best insulator. At a depth of only about a meter, the soil temperature remains almost unchanged throughout the year. In winter, It is significantly warmer than the icy air, and in summer, it protects from the heat. Medieval builders did not know scientific terms and did not measure the temperature in the ground with instruments, but based on generations of observations, they had a keen sense of how nature works. They used the earth as a natural way to keep warm in winter and cool in summer by building dwellings that were part of the soil. The construction of such a semi-dugout began with the excavation of a rectangular pit from 1/2 meter to 1.5 meters deep. This excavation determined the future space of the house. The recessed floor solved several problems at once. It reduced the height of the walls that were required above the surface, thereby saving building materials. The earthen walls on the sides became natural barriers against the wind. In cold seasons, such walls retained internal heat, and in windy regions, they protected against streams of icy air that could break through any slotted structure. The walls above ground level were made from the simplest materials that could be obtained within a few minutes' walk from the house. Craftsmen used a woven frame made of flexible branches or thin trunks. Then this frame was thickly coated with a mixture of clay, straw, and manure. After drying, this coating became hard, dense, and surprisingly warm. It was almost impervious to wind, and its uneven surface retained heat better than a bare log cabin. The straw and manure additives added strength, prevented cracking, and made the walls resistant to rain. The roof was a critically important element of the entire structure. It was made gabled, but the slopes were lowered so low that they almost touched the ground. This shape reduced the area exposed to the wind and helped the snow slide down. The roof actually formed the top cover of the dugout, and the straw or reeds used to cover it served as powerful insulation. Often, the layer of straw was so thick that the snow that fell in winter became an additional insulator, turning the house into the complete opposite of a drafty hut. The interior space of such houses was small, low, and cramped. But this was not a disadvantage, but a conscious decision. The smaller the volume of air, the faster it heats up, and the less fuel is needed to maintain it. Inside, there was almost always one room where people cooked, ate, worked, and slept. The low ceiling kept the heat at floor level, where the family was, and prevented it from rising, as in tall houses. The hearth was located directly on the earthen floor in the center of the room. It was a simple fire pit or a small clay platform where the fire was kept burning. The smoke escaped through a hole in the roof. This system seemed primitive, but it was designed so that most of the heat from the fire would remain inside. The earthen walls heated up and then slowly gave off the heat back. The wind could not penetrate inside and carry away the warm air. Of course, such houses were dark. The only light came through the door or a small opening under the roof. Smoke sometimes lingered under the roof, and there was a dim haze inside. But the inhabitants accepted this as an inevitable part of life. The enclosed space was quiet, calm, and warm. Even without an intense fire, the temperature inside remained well above zero because the main heating boiler was the walls themselves and the breath of the people. This technology was widespread throughout Northern Europe. Archaeologists find such houses in England, Denmark, Germany, Scandinavia, Poland, and the territory of the Eastern Slavs. This suggests that the idea of building downwards rather than upwards was a universal response to poverty, cold, and fuel shortages. People used the cheapest but most effective materials: earth, clay, branches, and straw. They were not concerned with beauty, but with warmth. And in the early Middle Ages, this was more important than any architectural aesthetics. Modern reconstructions of Grubenhaus show that it was indeed possible to survive the entire winter in such houses while consuming a minimum of fuel. Their natural insulation worked so well that even in severe frosts, the temperature inside remained acceptable. It was an architecture of survival, honed over centuries, built on observation, experience, and respect for nature. It prioritized not comfort or appearance, but the protection of human life. If this is the first time you've heard about this construction technique, please like this video. It's one of the forgotten masterpieces of human ingenuity. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos about survival in the Middle Ages. winter diet of medieval people was completely subordinated to one main task that took precedence over all other everyday needs. It was necessary to provide the body with as many calories as possible while consuming as little fuel as possible, because every piece of wood or peat was too valuable to be wasted unnecessarily. In winter, food became not just a means of sustenance, but the main source of heat that sustained life. Therefore, everything that a family planned to eat in winter had to be prepared in advance during the warm season. Summer and autumn turned into an endless cycle of harvesting, processing, and preserving food, because delay could cost lives. The main method of preservation, which allowed meat and fish to be stored without having to cook them over a fire at the time of consumption, was salting. People understood that salt had almost magical properties. If you sprinkle it thickly over pieces of meat or fish, the salt draws out all the moisture, and the product effectively ceases to be an environment where bacteria can live. Salted meat could be stored for months, even if the cellar was cold, damp, or completely covered with snow. Before consumption, people often tried to soak such food to wash away at least some of the salt, but this did not always work. Often, salted meat remained tough, hard, and very salty, but in those days, calories were more important than taste. Another important way of preserving food was drying and curing. Meat, fish, fruit, and mushrooms were laid out in the sun, hung over the hearth, or placed in ventilated sheds. When the product lost moisture, it became surprisingly light, compact, and could be stored for a very long time with virtually no change. Dried meat could be chewed like a hard root, and dried fruit resembled small pieces of sweet wood. These supplies were always at hand. They could be taken on the road, placed next to the bed, or stored in a bag against the wall. They did not require fire, which made dry foods especially valuable in winter, when every piece of fuel mattered. Dairy products were almost never consumed fresh. Fresh milk was only enough for a day and spoiled quickly, especially when the house was warm from the hearth. Therefore, milk was processed immediately. Hard cheese became the most important and durable product. It was pressed, salted, and stored in cool places. Over time, it became harder, but did not lose its nutritional value. Such cheese was a real concentrate of protein and fat, and each piece of it turned into a small store of energy that could be eaten without any preparation. Of course, grains remained the basis of the diet. People relied on rye, oats, and barley because these crops could grow in cold climates and produced a stable harvest. But even here, they tried to save fuel. Bread was not baked every day. Often, the entire village used one common oven, which was heated once a week or even less often, because heating a massive stone oven required a huge amount of firewood. They baked large, dense loaves of dark bread, which became harder as the days passed. Such bread did not spoil and could be stored for weeks. It was eaten dry, soaked in water, or added to soup where it softened. Root vegetables were an essential part of the winter diet. Turnips, carrots, rutabagas, and parsnips could all be stored throughout the winter if placed in a cellar, covered with straw, or simply left in a pit in the ground. They did not spoil in the frost and could be kept for weeks in a warm house without rotting. They were eaten raw, added to soups, grated on a coarse grater, or cooked together with grain. These vegetables provided carbohydrates, vitamins, and at least some variety in a diet that consisted mostly of heavy, salty, and fatty foods. Hot meals were not the norm every day. Fire was used sparingly because firewood could run out at the most inopportune moment. Therefore, in most homes, the hearth was lit once a day to cook a thick soup called pottage. Everything that was at hand went into the pot: crushed grain, dried beans, pieces of salted meat, root vegetables. This soup was cooked for a long time, sometimes several hours, and then eaten throughout the day, sometimes without even reheating it. It was warm, filling, and very thick, although to modern people it might seem simple and tasteless. Sauerkraut and other pickled vegetables were not just a supplement, but a salvation from disease. They played a particularly important role in the fight against scurvy, which often affected people in winter due to a lack of fresh vitamins. Fermentation allowed vegetables to be preserved alive, rich in nutrients, and did not require fire. It was cold food, but it saved health and sometimes lives. Fats were a real treasure. Salted or smoked lard was stored as carefully as jewelry. A small piece of lard provided a huge boost of energy, which was so necessary in the cold. It was eaten with bread, added to soups, or simply nibbled on in small slices. Fat helped the body stay warm and was indispensable for people who spent a lot of time in the cold. Thus, the winter diet of medieval people was mainly cold, salty, dry, or fermented. Hot food appeared only when the hearth was lit, but most of the diet consisted of supplies that did not require fire. It was a diet not for pleasure, but for survival, designed to enable people to survive the long months of cold without wasting fuel or risking running out of food. Guess what happened next when all the water turned to ice? We are so used to water from the tap that we forget that water is not a given. In medieval winters, when temperatures remained below zero for weeks, obtaining drinking water became a daily, laborious struggle. The lack of fire to melt snow made this problem critical. All surface water sources, rivers, lakes, ponds, were covered with a thick layer of ice. Wells could also freeze to a considerable depth. Breaking through the ice was incredibly difficult. It required special tools, such as heavy crowbars and ice picks, and considerable physical effort. Every day, someone from the family, most often a woman, had to go to the source and chop the ice to collect buckets of water. This work was exhausting and dangerous. It was possible to slip and fall into the icy water, which in the absence of a warm home and dry clothes was almost fatal. Snow was not a simple solution. First, snow was very fluffy, and a huge amount of it had to be melted to get 1 bucket of water. Second, and most importantly, fire was needed to melt the snow. And as we have already established, fuel was in short supply and was used primarily for cooking. Melting snow or ice is a very energy-intensive process. Spending precious firewood just to get water was wasteful. Therefore, people preferred to spend hours cutting a hole in the ice rather than minutes melting snow. Water from the hole was valued and used very sparingly. This water was ice cold. Drinking it was unpleasant and even dangerous, as it could cause a sore throat. But people drank it anyway. Washing with this water was out of the question. Hygiene in winter was kept to an absolute minimum. For livestock, if there was any, the problem was even more acute. Animals need a lot of water every day. Providing water for cows or horses was a separate, difficult task. Often there was only one hole in the ice for the whole village, and people lined up to use it. The water brought into the house in wooden buckets had to be stored somewhere. In an unheated or poorly heated room, it quickly froze again. Therefore, it was stored as close as possible to the hearth if it was burning or they tried to use it immediately. Sometimes the heat of the house or barn was used to obtain water. A barrel of snow or ice could be brought inside, and over several days it would slowly thaw from the slight heat in the room. It was a slow method, but one that did not require fuel. The problem of water dictated the way of life. In winter, people tried to move less, so they would sweat less and therefore want to drink less. Fluid consumption was reduced to a physiological minimum. What aspect of this daily struggle for water seems most difficult to you? In the next chapter, we will talk about how people coped with almost round-the-clock darkness. Winter in the Middle Ages was not only a time of cold, but also a time of almost complete darkness. The short daylight hours ended early, and artificial lighting was as much a luxury as heat. People lived according to the rhythm dictated by the sun. When the sun went down, active life practically came to a standstill. The most expensive source of light was wax candles. Beeswax was incredibly expensive and was available almost exclusively to the church and the wealthiest households. Wax candles burned cleanly, did not smoke, and gave off a pleasant scent, but they were beyond the means of peasants or craftsmen. A cheaper alternative was tallow candles. They were made from animal fat left over after slaughtering livestock. Such candles were affordable but had many disadvantages. They burned unevenly, smoked heavily, filling the already stuffy room with a pungent smell, and melted. The poorest households did not even have tallow candles. They used splinters, thin, long pieces of dry wood. The splinter was inserted into a special holder, a candlestick, and lit. It gave off a dim, flickering light, but burned very quickly, requiring constant replacement. Another common source of light was the so-called maklush, or rushlight. This was the core of ordinary marsh reeds, soaked in any available fat or tallow. Such a candle burned longer than a splinter, but gave off a very dim light and a lot of smoke. It was a light of survival, sufficient only to avoid bumping into objects. Due to the high cost and inefficiency of lighting, most people simply did not work in the dark. At dusk, all complex work ceased. Winter evenings were a time that simply had to be waited out. The family gathered together in one room. It was a time for oral activities. In the dark, or by the light of a single torch, people told stories, fairy tales, and legends. It was not only a form of entertainment, but also a way of passing on knowledge, history, and moral norms. Oral culture flourished during these long, dark evenings. It was also a time for simple, monotonous work that could be done almost by touch. Women spun wool using a spindle, which did not require good eyesight. Men could repair simple utensils, weave ropes or baskets. Psychologically, it was a difficult time. The combination of cold, darkness, and forced idleness could lead to despondency. That is why the social gatherings mentioned earlier were so important. They dispelled not only the physical cold, but also the gloom of isolation. It is difficult for modern people, living in a world of electric light, to imagine this almost round-the-clock darkness. But for medieval people, it was the norm. They adapted their life cycle to the cycle of the sun, falling into a kind of collective hibernation in winter. In addition to obvious materials such as wood, stone, and wool, there was a whole arsenal of unnoticed but vital insulators. Medieval people skillfully used what was literally at their feet. These humble materials played a huge role in preserving heat. One of the main heroes was ordinary moss. It was collected in large quantities in the forest and used for caulking. Moss was carefully stuffed into all the gaps between the logs in a log cabin or in the wooden frame of a house. Unlike tow, moss did not absorb moisture as much, did not rot, and had good insulating properties. Straw was another versatile material. A thick layer of straw on the roof, as we have already mentioned, was the best insulation. But it was also used inside the house. Straw mattresses were standard bedding. Fresh, dry straw retained body heat well and was softer than the bare floor. The floors in simple houses were often earthen. To insulate them, the floor was covered with a thick layer of straw or dry reeds. This layer was changed as it became dirty. It not only insulated from the cold ground, but also absorbed moisture and dirt, making the dwelling a little cleaner. Dry leaves collected in the fall were also used. They could be stuffed into mattresses or simply poured into the space between double walls, if there were any. It was a simple and free form of loose insulation that created an air gap. Peat was a valuable resource in marshy areas. It was used not only as fuel, which burned slowly and gave off a lot of heat. Layers of dry peat could also be used as a building material, replacing stones or wood in the construction of walls. Peat walls had excellent thermal insulation properties. Even manure found a use. Mixed with clay and straw, it was used to plaster the walls of wattle and daub houses. As it dried, this composite material became as hard as cement and impervious to wind. It was a cheap and effective plaster. Insulation was also used in personal hygiene. Leather shoes were stuffed with dry grass or moss. This not only insulated the shoes, but also worked as a disposable insole, absorbing sweat. It was primitive, but it worked. These humble materials, moss, straw, reeds, peat, were the basis of medieval heating technology. They were accessible, free, and renewable. Knowing how to properly collect, dry, and apply them was as important for survival as knowing how to sow bread. They demonstrate our ancestors' deep understanding of the properties of the materials around them. They did not have modern insulation, but intuitively used the same principles, creating air pockets, protecting against wind, and reducing thermal conductivity. This ingenuity, based on observation of nature, enabled survival in conditions that seem incompatible with life to us. Without these unsung heroes of isolation, neither woolen clothing nor houses sunk into the ground would have been as effective. Human survival in a harsh climate depended not only on shelter, clothing, or food supplies. The main tool was always the person themselves and their ability to adapt. Medieval people possessed a resilience that seems almost unbelievable to us today. They grew up in conditions where cold was not a temporary phenomenon, but a constant part of life. Therefore, their bodies and minds were shaped in an environment that required constant readiness to endure hardship. This made people physically and morally completely different from us. Today, we live in a constantly controlled environment that can be called a thermal cocoon. We hardly ever encounter natural temperatures and hide from them wherever we can. Our homes have heating, air conditioners keep us comfortable, and transportation takes us from one warm space to another. We have forgotten that cold weather was once the rule rather than the exception. The modern human body rarely experiences the true effects of frost. As a result, we are much less tolerant of temperature fluctuations. Medieval man, on the contrary, lived in constant weather fluctuations. His body was accustomed to rapid cooling and equally rapid warming. As he grew older, he learned not to fear the cold, but to interact with it. He understood that the temperature could change several times a day and accepted this as normal. Coarse clothing helped only a little, but the main source of heat remained their own bodies. This is how natural resistance was formed. This resilience was based on physiological mechanisms that are much less developed in us. People living in cold climates had more active brown fat, which is capable of generating heat without the involvement of muscles. This natural heating protected them from hypothermia. They could stay in the cold longer without harming their health. They used this ability every day. This is how the body adapted to harsh winters. Nutrition played an equally important role. In winter, the diet was rich in fats and carbohydrates, which provided a lot of energy. This energy not only fueled the muscles, but also allowed the body to generate additional internal heat. What we now call junk food was vital and considered the norm. People burned a huge amount of calories just to stay warm. Their metabolism was much more active than ours. Such food formed a special reserve of strength. The body gradually accumulated a little fat, which served not only as a source of energy, but also as a natural insulator. This reserve was not condemned by society. On the contrary, it was considered a necessary protection. People did not think about appearance the way we do, because being overweight was a sign of strength and health. In winter, it could save your life. The perception of cold was also completely different. For us, a slight frost can be a shock. For a medieval person, the same frost was just the beginning of real winter. They did not expect mercy from nature and did not count on comfort. They knew that the cold would be long and severe, but they also knew that they would be able to endure it. This attitude formed a high threshold of tolerance. People got used to the fact that their homes were almost always cold. Even the best log cabins or stone houses were poorly insulated and lost heat. At night, the temperature could drop very low, and no one was surprised by this. Families slept under several layers of wool and fur, warming each other. The breath of people and animals gradually warmed the air. This created a microclimate that differed from the harsh reality outside. Psychological resilience was no less important than physical resilience. Medieval people did not perceive the cold as an enemy that had to be eliminated. They perceived it as an inevitable part of life. It was necessary to adapt not in summer, but in winter, when every day was a challenge. People knew in advance that winter would be long and hard. This was accepted without panic. Emotional resilience was developed from childhood. Religion played a huge role in shaping resilience. It provided an explanation for all hardships, including hunger and cold. Deprivation was perceived as a test that had to be passed with dignity. People believed that suffering purified the soul and brought them closer to the divine. This belief gave them incredible inner resilience. The cold was not an enemy, but a messenger of trial. This religious consciousness helped people endure the hardest part of winter. Prayers and rituals gave them hope. People believed that after the darkest night, dawn would surely come. This awareness transformed the cold, dark winter into an important stage of spiritual life. It helped to maintain clarity of mind. This spiritual support was fundamental. The anticipation of spring was one of the most important cultural experiences. The first warm days were perceived as a miracle. The melting of the snow seemed like a real liberation. When the first greenery appeared, people felt deep joy. Their lives were once again filled with work and movement. It reminded them that the hardest times are always followed by rebirth. We have journeyed through the icy darkness of the medieval winter, and I hope this journey has changed your perception of the past. The survival of our ancestors was a quiet, daily feat based not on fire, but on ingenious inventiveness. They used the earth as a blanket, turned wool into armor, and found warmth in the cramped confines of a shared home. It was an era when people were forced to use every resource nature gave them: moss, straw, clay, and even their own fat. Cold food, icy water, and almost complete darkness were their companions for months on end. They survived thanks to the incredible adaptability of their bodies and their unyielding strength of spirit. What other topics from medieval life would you like us to explore? Perhaps you are interested in how they built their ships, how medieval medicine worked, or what the real technology of siege weapons was like? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research.